Hey everybody, welcome back to Page, Colin here, and today I'm going to be reviewing Il Cimitero di Praga, or as we say in English, the Prague Cemetery by Umberto Eco. Umberto Eco is basically one of Italy's biggest literary icons. If you name a list of the top authors from Italy, most people will probably have him on their list. He's just a huge author, one of the best Italy's got to offer. He's really great, and this book is actually my first by him, and I very quickly realized why people like his writing so much within the first few chapters of reading the book. So the Prague Cemetery has a very, very convoluted plot, really. It's something you have to really work to figure out, but it's not crazy complicated. It just takes a little bit of brain power, and you really don't understand what's going on unless you've guessed, of course, where the plot is really going or what's happening. So the first chapter is kind of a frame. You get basically the setting, and the only thing you know is that there's an old man in France writing this in his diary very frantically. That's basically the entire first chapter. And in the second chapter, we're introduced to the, I guess you can call him a protagonist of the book, Simone Simonini. And basically, a lot of the story is told by his diary entries. But there's also another character that makes these entries, and you don't know if it's Simonini, if it's someone else, if they're the same person, and they're writing these letters back and forth to each other. So you kind of have to figure out what's going on. Does this guy have multiple personality disorder? Is he going crazy? Are there really two different characters we're getting the narrative from? That's something that really starts off in the first few chapters and makes you think. And then there's also a narrator who I believe narrates the first chapter, but he also kind of pieces things together in between the letters and diary entries that you read. So throughout the book, you have this narrative between Simonini and Abbe Pico Dalla, or pardon my pronunciation. Italian names are hard to pronounce for me. But he has this back and forth with Abbe, and it's very convoluted. It's really hard to piece together what's happening sometimes, because sometimes one will relay the events, and then the other relays similar events, but differently, and sometimes they fill in each other's gaps. But it isn't really until the last few chapters you realize what is going on. So I'm not going to try to spoil or anything. You can figure out yourself by reading it. I would definitely recommend doing so. But you really figure out from the start that Simonini is not really a guy that is very agreeable. I called him the protagonist earlier, but it's really a case of the protagonist is the antagonist of the story. And I believe that's what Eco intended for this book. I believe he was trying to write a very disagreeable character, one that you don't really like and is not a very good person. The second chapter is literally about the guy's childhood, but it kind of turns into his manifesto on every single person he hates. He really hates Jews, which was passed down from his grandfather. He hates the French. He hates, I believe, the Spanish, and he really hates Italians, which is kind of ironic because Eco himself is Italian. But he really has a lot of hatred. He hates women as well. He says a lot of very interesting things about that. It's almost so his hatred is so over the top at times, it's almost comedic. So you have him just making snide little remarks throughout the entire book about whether it be Jews, women who he's repulsed by, Germans, Russians, Italians, anyone he doesn't like, Masons, everyone. He's coming for everyone. He doesn't not like anybody. And it's just very interesting to see his mind evolve throughout the narrative almost. An interesting thing about the book is that it takes place throughout a lot of big events in the history of Europe. So I'm not very well versed on a lot of the events it goes through, but you don't really have to be to get something out of the book. I would recommend reading about a few historical events, namely the campaigns of Napoleon, especially in relation to Italy, and Sicily, and a bit of history on the Masons. Um, you should definitely read about the Dreyfus affair. Knowing about that helped me out a lot. And also knowing a bit about just the history of anti-Semitism in Europe, mainly in the 1800s. Certain events like that will definitely benefit your reading of this book. So, like I said, I wasn't well versed in European history going into it, but you don't have to be, but it would help a lot if you were. Things like the Paris Commune, all of these things, a lot of very Italian and France-centric historical events that occurred in the 1800s. So that's kind of specific, but that's really what this covers. Another thing you need to realize about this book is you can't expect to understand anything. Eco is a semiotics, I believe, professor, but he studies semiotics. That's his main concern, which is the study of the meaning of symbols. So there's a lot of symbolism, a lot of esoteric things in the book you're not really going to understand, and Eco doesn't really expect the reader to understand that. So that's good. But Simone is really, his job is a forger. He forges documents for a living. So with all the hate, he has a lot of hatred in his heart, and he also, his profession is to basically be a deceiver, be a trickster, a fraudster, someone that isn't doing the very moral thing. But he finds himself wrapped up in all of these historical things and happenings, and he's just the cause of it, really. The centerpiece of the novel takes place when the main character actually decides to forge a document to try to defame the Jewish people, which is where the title actually comes from. He conjures up this scene of some leaders of the Jewish community convening in a cemetery in Prague, a Jewish cemetery in Prague, and they basically discuss a plan to take over the world, and they summon a lot of evil spirits and all this stuff. Well, this is actually based on a document that was published in real life called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, I believe. And this was a very famous document which claimed that the Jews were trying to take over the world. I believe it was published in Russia. But in the novel, Simone is the one who actually writes it up and has this thing published. As I've said, he hates everyone, and the Jews is on the hit list. So that's where he directs. That's really what he considers the highlight of his career as a forger and fraudster. So as you can tell, a big theme of this novel is the nationalism and racism, really, and hatred. How hatred has become a cultural phenomenon in Europe. Now, I am American, so I can't comment on social issues in Europe. All I can do is take what Eco is implying and relay that information based on my own assumptions. But you see a lot of stuff in this book that kind of points towards the rise of anti-Semitic ideas in Europe that would later blossom in the next century. Nazism is the obvious example. You hear a lot of things, including like the final solution in this novel. So I believe that Eco was kind of going through all this history to try to draw, using a fictional story that is based on truth and history, to kind of draw parallels and show the rising tensions in Europe based on racism and nationalism that would eventually rear its ugly head in the aftermath of World War I. Now I'd actually like to read one of my favorite quotes from the book. I looked through the book really quickly and I wasn't able to find it, but I found a bit of it online, so if you don't mind, I'll read that. Hatred has to be cultivated as a civic passion. The enemy is the friend of the people. You always want someone to hate in order to feel justified in your own misery. Hatred is the true primordial passion. It is love that's abnormal. That is why Christ was killed. He spoke against nature. You don't love someone for your whole life. That is impossible. Hope is the source of adultery, matricide, betrayal of friends. But you can hate someone for your whole life, provided he's always there to keep your hatred alive. Hatred warms the heart. And that is really sums up the novel from Simone's perspective. I do not remember which character said that. I believe it might have been Simone himself. But that is really the thesis of Simone, the idea of Simone. An interesting fact that Umberto Eco actually says in the very back of the novel, he kind of shows you what the plot is supposed to be. So in case you haven't put the pieces together, but in the story, you can kind of look there and, follow along. And he explains that every character in the story except Simone is actually a real historical figure. And that's just so impressive to me. If you are a lover of historical fiction, this has to be on your list. Like, it's got to be on your list. It really does. If you are interested in the social decay and study of society in Europe, namely France and Germany and Italy and countries like that, then this is definitely something you want to check out. Just to finish up my thoughts on this book, I think it's wonderful. It's a very fun read. I read it pretty quickly, but sometimes you want to take your time with it. But if you can stomach a lot of just very vitriolic and poisonous passages that are just full of hatred and contempt for people, and you can stomach that, I would totally give this novel a try. It's a great study. It's a great thesis. It's a great observation of society and history itself. So Eco has really, I've always wanted to check him out, and now I have. I understand what the hype is about. He is a truly great author, and I will have to read more of his works in the future. If you like Eco, feel free to leave a comment. Give me any suggestions for any novels of his that are good. Of course, Name of the Rose and Foucault's Pendulum come to mind. But yeah, leave your thoughts on Eco below. My first encounter with him was very positive. So on that note, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for supporting Page to Page, and I will see you later.